really want to, I'm really excited about tonight's topic. And I'm Eric Chabot. Most of you know me by now. We have these meetings every week and we cover a large range of topics. We got a lot of different people on. Sometimes I will do the meetings, other times we'll have guests. And I always look for topics that are obviously relevant to what's going on in the world around us and the culture. And tonight, our guest, Kyle, how do you say your last name, Kyle? Is it Beshears?
Beshears.
Beshears. We have Kyle Beshears with us. And, you know, I'll show Kyle's book in a second here. I'll have it up on a slide. But this book caught my attention because I try to keep up with all the current literature. You know, it's all I need to do is sit on Amazon all day. It's all I do. I don't do anything else. But this book caught my attention and I thought, whoa, that looks like a very interesting topic. Being that we do campus apologetic ministry here, of course, we kind of have a feel for, you know, what's going on the campuses. Of course, we can't speak for the entire nation, but, you know, of course, so this book caught my attention. It looked very, very interesting. And then I reached out to Kyle by email and my email got lost in his spam folder for about a month. And I kind of gave up. I said, oh no, he's just too busy out promoting his book and doing other things. So he doesn't have time. But sure enough, he got back to me and said he found the email. So I'm glad we could connect and have Kyle on tonight. And Kyle, why don't you go ahead and just start out, tell us a little about yourself. Like I know you're pastoring now, but what's been and then what led up to you writing this book? Maybe just a little background.
Yeah, so I guess for the background of the book, there's kind of two streams, I guess, that led me to writing it. The first one is kind of my experience I had in England. So my wife and I lived in Cambridge years back. I was working nearby. Don't mistake me for someone smart enough to study there.
Yeah, you went to Cambridge, right? Anyway.
But we lived there for 3 years, and we were part of a active, lively church, and we participated in the life of that church, leading community groups and those types of things. And I noticed that conversations I was having with people about spirituality and the gospel and faith were kind of falling on deaf ears, and I have misinterpreted why that was. To hostility. So I just thought to myself, well, people didn't like me because I was a believer, maybe because I was American. They don't like the conversation that we're having because they're hostile to faith, or maybe they just didn't have enough time and this was kind of like a burden for them. But I had a chance encounter with a fellow who kind of pointed out to me that it's not so much that people are hostile to faith, it's that they're indifferent. They're completely apathetic to it. And in that encounter was kind of the first, like the light bulb clicked. So every conversation I had that kind of fell flat on the face was due to the fact that people just didn't really care. And combine that with years later, I was studying for a PhD, and they make you do a minor. And so I chose philosophy for the very reason of like exploring how somebody could be completely indifferent to questions related to God and his existence and his character and work. And so the book was kind of a convergence of both like my personal experience and then kind of the studies in that area that I was able to do for a few years. Great.
Where'd you go? So you got your doctorate at where?
Southern Seminary.
Oh, Southern. Oh, Southern. Yeah. See, I say Southern Evangelical Seminary, Southern. If I say sort of Southern, there's so many different Southerns, like you have to clarify which one it is. So I do know what Southern Seminary is. Okay, great. And you got a doctorate in philosophy? Well, of course you have a doctorate in philosophy, but did you? Yeah.
No, so world religions. So
world religions, okay.
Bizarre, but my major is actually in Mormon history. So
really?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with apatheism. And then I'm actually turning in my final draft to my supervisor this week. So I should graduate.
So you're just finishing up
after that.
Okay. But you don't have any Mormon background though, like in your spiritual.
I don't.
Okay. All right, because we encounter a lot of Mormons here at Ohio State. They have a pretty big church here. So we've all been, everyone's here, they're gonna try to convert you at some point. You know, we're just kind of used to it. We're kind of used to that. Okay, let me pull up your book here. And let's go to, I'm gonna show people the cover. Okay, so this is the book right here. You can get that on Amazon, wherever. I got it on Kindle because I read faster on Kindle. I like to speed read on Kindle for some reason. So I still like hard copies. You see my books. Actually, this is like half my library. I'm just, I have these old copies I have to get rid of sometimes. But anyway, so you can get it. I just purchased this recently. I'm really enjoying it. Kyle, you got some real nuggets in here. Some things you said. I put that one on Facebook yesterday. How we get so much meaning in what we do. You know what I mean? And once that's taken, people, the American dream just drives us to do things all the time. And so that one struck a nerve with a few people I know, which, but it's so true. I mean, it's so spot on. So yeah, you've got some real nuggets in this book so far as I'm finishing it, but I'm enjoying it. So that's the book, everyone. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So let's go ahead and Carl, why don't we go ahead and try to define what we mean by apatheism. So I know that you have it in your book. It's kind of a newer word, maybe that's come out. I mean, we have atheism and theism and agnosticism and all that stuff. But am I correct? An apatheist is one that just finds topics as like God and religion as irrelevant, meaningless, or disinteresting, and you say the things that contribute to that. Well, belief in God is contestable, diverse, and our status of life is comfortable and distracted, and that's what kind of leads to an apatheism. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, the term itself is pretty counterintuitive, right? You have apathy and then theism. So
right.
We're talking about an indifference towards belief in God, and that's not to say that there's an indifference towards religion altogether. So people might find religion sociologically interesting. They're interested in knowing kind of what their neighbors believe or how that affects culture. But when it comes to a person individually and how it affects them, they're not interested in God at all. So this is I would distinguish apatheism from other kind of intuitively related isms like agnosticism or atheism, in that atheism is the position that there's no God that exists. Agnosticism is we can't know whether or not God exists, but apatheism is the position where whether or not he exists is irrelevant, and so the questions themselves are not meaningless, but fruitless. That kind of a conversation is not really all that important. And the way you can kind of tell the difference, practically speaking, between those three categories is that an atheist, and I'm sure if you do campus ministry, an atheist and an agnostic are really interested in talking about faith. They're really interested in questions related to God. They just answer the questions in the negative, right? But an apatheist is not interested at all in talking about God, and I think that's a new thing that we're experiencing.
Interesting. Well, let me mention something because I talked about this last week, but something just quickly about our campus ministry. I don't want to turn all the spotlight on me. I just to tie this in with what we're doing. So we decided to pop this question over the last 6 weeks before they ended their term here at Ohio State. Does God exist? It's been like our go-to question, and you can see our whiteboard. Now that's one day, of course. It can look different from day to day, but we do still get a lot of yeses. But get some no's, get some I don't knows. But it's really interesting, Kyle. Over the last year, so we came back in the fall last year after COVID, and we could still go outside and set up. We couldn't meet inside anywhere, and we talked to students, we could table. And then this spring, this year, out of all the years I've been there, which has been now like 15 to 16 years, this year was the most openness I'd seen to the God question. Now on this campus, I'm only talking about our campus. I don't know what's going on across the country, but the point is that I saw more people interested in talking about it. We saw more people actually come to faith. We saw people, like you said, atheists still wanted to talk, agnostics want to talk, but I do agree. I always run into some of those people I would say are apatheists. They're still out there. I mean, I still run into some are like, it just has no relevance to me. I'm busy and I'm happy with the way I am. And I'm happy, all these, kind of apatheist comments. And so there is some of that. But I still see in the midst of that, at least where we were at this year, I do see an openness and a hunger for truth and some spiritual things. Now, if you're in England, I've never been to England, but that's a whole different story there. And I have a friend that's going to Italy in missions full time, and he describes his short-term mission trip to Italy very similar to what you encountered in England, something very similar. So I think obviously we know where it's going to depend where we are and what range of the culture or what part of the country you're in or what city we're in. It's going to be different everywhere. But fortunately for us, maybe it's because of the year of COVID. Like I'll talk about what you talk about in the book, some challenges in our country. Maybe people are just fed up, with political solutions and COVID divide and racism divide, and they want to, cling to something, that's out there. So I just want to mention that, but I'll let me move on here. So You talk about secularism in the book, and so when I first thought of apatheism, my initial hunch was before I even started reading your book that, oh, he's going to be probably tying in secularism. It has something to do with secularism, is what leads to it. And, we know that secularism can lead to kind of like an alternative view of reality. People aren't religious if they're secular. They don't maybe believe in any supernatural. Sometimes this leads to, I'll talk about a little more secularism in a minute with skepticism, but what I noticed you quoted a lot of Charles Taylor's work, which is great, but what do you think is the time between secularism and apatheism? I know you cover a lot of ground in your book on that, but you want to mention that?
Yeah, there's really two, I think, direct links between secularism and apatheism, and it's you have to kind of come at secularism from Taylor's perspective. If you're unfamiliar with Charles Taylor, he's a Catholic philosopher who's kind of challenged the commonplace story that the Enlightenment was this social revolution that kind of got rid of God from public spheres and either isolated him to private spheres, individual belief, or eradicated belief altogether. And Taylor says, no, that's not quite what secularism is. Secularism is, or imagine secularism, I should say, or he would say, as a permission for any individual to hold whatever kind of belief, regardless of what their neighbors believe. So secularism is a space where there is no homogeny in belief. It's the classic diversity of belief. So that belief can be atheism, that I don't believe in God. So the idea that God exists is contestable. But it could also be, I believe in God, I just believe in God differently than, say, a Christian does or a Jew does. I'm a Muslim. Or I hold to some kind of new religious movement like Scientology or something like that. That's the thing Taylor's pushing against. If the Enlightenment was in secularism is really just the eradication of belief, well, why is it that we have all sorts of new different types of religious beliefs that have sprung up in the past 200 or 300 years? Mm-hmm. So apatheism comes into play here when an individual in a secular society has either accepted that belief in God is contestable, and if belief in God is contestable, and they land on the fact or the opinion that he doesn't exist, then it's only a one short leap to get from God doesn't exist to, well, if he doesn't exist, it doesn't really matter at all. This is what happens after kind of the new atheist movement. And then for kind of the other side of secularism, pluralism, is that perhaps there's just too many answers to these God questions and nobody really knows what they're talking about. If they do, I'll just let them sort it out. But for me, it doesn't really have any utility to my life. And so the questions of whether or not he exists might be interesting to somebody else. They're just not interesting to me because there's too many answers and nobody seems to know what truth is or what they're talking about.
Yeah, I have heard that. We've heard that along the campus. When it comes to the on the question board I had to don't know, we always say back to the person, what would it take to know? What do you think it'd take to know? And they really, I'd say not. I had if I had a dollar bill for every time I've heard it, I wouldn't have to do anything the rest of my life. But it seems like you always hear the same thing. Well, we just can't know. We can't prove it. We don't know. There's just no way to know. And it's just there's too many debates about it, and I just can't know. It's always an epistemological issue, of course, a study of knowledge. And so, we have to kind of walk them through that and break that down. But they always say that, like I just don't think you can know, or I don't know how we would know, and maybe we can't know, and so it's just very interesting. Would you say, of course, the internet has played a huge role? There's just too much information to grab onto now, right? That's a huge problem, right?
Yeah, and that's certainly one of the things I argue for in the book too, is we're just so distracted across so many different platforms of technology. Everything's vying for our attention. So the contemplation about God questions requires meditation, and it requires slowness and to pause and to really reflect in our go world that's completely overloaded with information. Some of us might not have the motivation to care about God because it just seems like it's too much work for too little gain.
Right. Yep. And they want a quick answer, and it just doesn't work that way with the God question. So you say here also, you're talking about secularism, it kind of mixed in with skepticism that, you say here, religion can be a very contentious issue. So why should we get ourselves worked up over it, over imaginary superstition? This is what, of course, what seculars say. And they say this was the argument made by journalist Jonathan Rauch, who popularized the concept of apatheism. In his Atlantic Monthly article, Let It Be, in the wake of the terrorist attacks of 9/11, Rauch denounced ideological fundamentalisms, whether religious, jihad, the Islam stuff, or religious Stalinism, as harmful to progression and safety of society. The solution he claimed was apatheism, which is a calming effect of all belief, regardless of its content. An ideologically dispassionate society is one undisturbed by radicalization. So I would say that, I was at Ohio State I was also on campus around 2006 to 2009, at the height of the new atheist movement, when all that stuff was being written. And we had all the atheists running around trying to convert us, because a lot of them turned into evangelists at that point. But then it kind of faded. It just kind of faded away. And so I would say the remnants are still there, some of the remnants, but I would say it reached that kind of peak, I would say, at that time frame, like 2006 to 2010, in that range. And there's a lot of debates going on the campus with the atheist group, and elsewhere. But so would you say that part of the reason people are gravitating towards some sort of apatheism is because, they look at some of the bad things that happen in the name of religion, and maybe some sort of fundamentalism negatively, and so they just kind of punt out, and that's kind of another thing they do, right? That leads to that.
Yeah, and that's definitely Rauch's argument. And I mean, he wrote that article in 2003, and I think Rauch's position is going to outlast the new atheist position. So he ended up being right after all, which is really remarkable if you consider the world that he was living in the wake of 9/11. Religion was blamed. Religion in general was blamed for a lot of the world's ills. And so there was a lot of hostility, anger, and resentment towards religion in general. And Rauch says, well, maybe we should just not care. He was kind of a prophet in that sense. And I will say, I presented a paper in Denver a few years back with a guy named Randall Rouser, and he
I know who he is.
Yeah, you know Randall. Okay, great.
Yeah,
great.
I don't know him personally, but I know who he is.
Okay.
I've read his stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and he makes a good point. He said what Rauch's looking for is not necessarily bad. We should not tolerate jihadism or some kind of violent fundamentalism or Stalinism. It doesn't matter what your ideology is. If you're doing harm to your neighbor, physical harm to your neighbor, that's a problem, right? And so he doesn't want to push Rauch out of the conversation altogether. But as Randall rightly argued, the second you walk away from questions like God and the meaning of our life compared to him, you're walking away from some of the most fundamental questions that human beings ask. Right. And a lot of the longings that human beings have are answered in those questions. And so you're giving up way too much if you think that this kind of undisturbed tranquility is worth it to avoid, radicalism in a culture. So I thought he had a really good nuanced reply to Rauch. I don't know if he's published. Oh, he has. He's put it on his blog. So if you look up Randall Rouser and Jonathan Rauch, I'm sure it'll pop up in a search engine.
I remember that name. I remember Rauch. Yeah, I remember that name. So I think I've read something by him. So, okay. So also, now this is long. I'm going to kind of summarize this. Don't we have to read the whole thing? So that you kind of talk about here in the book how apatheism seems to flourish, of course, in a society that's very comfortable, well off, has stability, a wealthy economy, maybe a stable government, if that's ever achievable. Obviously a lot of technology, a lot of entertainment, people are distracted. And then you talk a little bit here about, then when COVID comes along, church members are staying at home, watching things online, and all that stuff. And, they still have a little bit of security there, even though the virus is out there, but they still feel secure. They're kind of at home, in their domain, kind of protected and everything. So you kind of quote these psychologists here. It seems like, areas in the world, there's poverty and, and economic instability and things. Of course, the desire for God is going to be greater. There's a greater need for God. And then, of course, these existential needs are, needed. But it seems like in the countries, like Scandinavia, you quote, and then I'm assuming some parts of the US, it just seems like people just don't see the need because they just are so darn comfortable, and distracted. And so is that kind of where you're going with that, around that area there?
Absolutely. And that's a pretty well-known like sociological phenomenon. It's just that where I wanted to take it was a step further to say, you know, if your culture gives you everything that you need and you don't depend on God for anything, although we know you depend on him for everything, but the perception is that you're taken care of, you're safe, you have security in your existence, then God kind of seems irrelevant, right? I think
Right.
I have a line in the book where I'm constantly drawing contrast between what Western culture was like 500 years ago and what it's like today. And 500 years ago, every crop season, we would be begging and imploring God to send us rain so that we can have wheat, so that we can survive through the winter on eating grains. But today, I don't even think about that. Like what my concern is that my toddler just picked up my phone and ordered 10 boxes of cereal on Amazon. We're more than taken care of today, and God just kind of, it's not that God's irrelevant in that sense, it's that he's unnoticed, and because he's unnoticed, he becomes irrelevant to us.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure, no doubt about it. That's why when I worked at a college years ago as an advisor, and the African Christians that came in from Africa, they talked about how God had to provide all their stuff to get to America. He's got to provide their tuition. They just depend upon God and everything. I'm just like sitting there in my chair looking at them like, man, I feel like about 2 cents right now. I'm just like, this is just, we just don't even understand it. So it was quite humbling, to be honest. Okay, so this is the one of my favorite parts of the book right here. That's why I have to have it all up on one slide here, because I felt really I needed to do this. So this is what I love this. So technology alone is not driving our busyness. There's something hidden deep in the response of busy to the question of how are you? I'm doing more than I should because I want to feel like I am valuable. Our culture promotes a relentless drive to achieve the American dream by making improvements that lead to accomplishments. The best of us are always killing it at work because we equate who we are with what we do. We are busy being, not merely doing. To busy communicates importance. To be accomplished means we are needed. And we think that to be important and needed brings us happiness. So happiness is ultimately found in what we do. Happiness, like truth, is manufactured. Our whole identities becomes wrapped up in what we do. This is why the first question we ask strangers at parties is, yes, I know this from experience, by the way, is what do you do for a living? It's the number one question, right? We're gouging one another's value and worth, whether we know it or not. If God cannot help us rank up in our careers and social statuses, then he is irrelevant to our pursuit of fullness through doing. In this distracted world, God isn't merely unneeded, he's unnoticed. There simply isn't time to think about something that we doubt exists, and too diverse in options, it doesn't seem necessary. I thought that was just gold. I mean, I love that. That's one of my favorite parts of the book. So yeah, it's obviously true that people need to find an identity, right? They need to find identity in something. And today we're struggling with sexual identity. We're struggling with all kinds of identities, but one of them that's still pretty paramount, of course, is our career and what we accomplish. So I don't really, so would you say, Kyle, that people will only get interested in God if they maybe get a job or maybe something challenges their career or livelihood? That does happen, by the way. Is this something that's going to knock them in the face? In that area?
I don't want to tip cards too far because maybe we'll talk about it later in the conversation, but this is one small segment of a larger pie, which is essentially idolatry. So if we find our identity in our what we do, as far as our career is concerned, essentially we're finding our value, meaning, and purpose from that career, and that's asking too much from the career. It can't give you that. Ultimately, your identity, meaning, value, and purpose is found in God. And secondly, it's not going to be powerful or permanent enough to sustain you through times of deep sorrow. So that's definitely here where maybe a continental divide between how we approach hobbies and work and how we pull our identity from them. I think so my parents' generation and higher or older are right in here, right? It's the American dream. I'm climbing up the corporate ladder. The more material wealth I gain or the larger bank account I have, the more important I am. And the more important I am, the more needed I am, et cetera, et cetera. And if God can't help you climb that corporate ladder, then what's the point of having him? But I think for and that's true of like half of millennials too. I think for the other half of millennials and then for Gen Z, is it's not so much corporate ladder climbing as it is building an authentic identity by collecting experiences.
Right.
So
Very good.
and capturing those experiences in social media to show people that I'm important because I am, right? I have experienced X, Y, and Z, and that's what makes me authentic and unique and distinguished from my peers. It's funny, you know the old Chris Farley bit from SNL where he's a crisis or a guidance counselor brought in by parents trying to get their kids not
It's
to
the
do
greatest
drugs.
clip ever. It's the greatest, the
Yeah.
van down by the river. Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
greatest
you
clip
don't want to
ever.
end up like me in a van down by the river, which is hilarious to people probably like 35 and older. But for those
Like
that are
me.
35 and younger, it's like, well, wait, what kind of van and which river? You
Right.
know,
Right.
maybe I do want to live in a van that's like decked out, and because I want to experience and I want to have an authentic identity. But that's still going to lead you to the same space. It's just going to take a different path to get there.
Right. So yeah, you can have the experiences, but you get a little burnt out after a while, right? It's like one after the
Right.
other, and you have to kind of be up here all the time. Yeah.
Yes, and if God's not, if you can't use God in order to, you know, gain more authentic experiences, then he becomes irrelevant to you as well. So
Right.
it's the same pitfall. It's just taking a different path to get there.
Yeah, that's very good. That's very true. The experiences. Yep, absolutely. Very, very true. Okay, let me go back here to the slide set. Oops, sorry. Let's go back here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about put this back down here. I've got to move this around a little bit. I've got too many things in the way. Okay, let's talk a little bit about dealing with people a little bit who are into this apathyism stuff. So, okay, there's no doubt that you know, you have this. I kind of borrowed your chart here. I snipped it. Of course, I won't send this thing because I know that's not copyrighted. So don't worry. But I had to use it because there's no other way. I have to show people what I'm
sure. Yeah, it's no problem at all.
You have, you know, the way apologetics works, of course, is that you know, you have the people that come to you. You know, they have questions. You know, you're trying to share the gospel with them, and of course, these barriers go up. They have certain questions. You know, how do you know there's a God, or how do I trust the Bible, or how do you really know Jesus rose from the dead? Give me evidence, proof. What about this? What about that? And so, you know, we start dealing with the objections, which I've done. You know, we've done this on campus hundreds of times, and you know, all of us. I say everybody does apologetics on some level. I mean, there's just no way around it. But the point is that the goal, you know, is sometimes to, you know, generate, as you say, the plausibility of what we believe, given some reasons for why we think Christianity is true, or some reasons why we believe the gospel is worth pursuing. And so, you say at the bottom here of this quote, though, I thought this was, let's see here. Yeah, I thought this was interesting. You say here, the goal, of course, is not to demonstrate the plausibility of just any transcendent being, but the existence of the God of the Scripture. So the conversation draws to a close with the proclamation of the gospel. Lord willing, the conversation blossoms in a faith declaration leads to discipleship in the future, which is obviously always the goal. A conversation like this is only possible if both parties are interested in the God questions. Naturally, the Christian apologist is interested in such questions, but before God questions can be answered, apatheists must doubt the reason and motivations for being indifferent to God. Okay, so I think I can let me go ahead and tie this slide in with the next one, because I think it's going to go together, and then we can go from there versus me trying to. So you talk about starting, that's why I have this picture up here at the top. So you're talking about getting them to doubt a little bit what they're, you know, what's really filling, they're trying to fill the void in with something else. You're getting to doubt that a little bit instead of just jumping to the argument. So what's going on there? Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the one thing I think we have to recognize with, well, there's a couple of caveats. The first one is we have to recognize when it comes to apatheists that we're used to starting with a mutually common interest in questions related to God and his existence and character and work. So this is what a lot of apologetic and evangelism models are based on. We just assume that you want to ask the ultimate questions of life, or that you are asking them, and how might the gospel speak into them. But with apathy in specific, we can't rely on that kind of interest anymore. We're actually starting from a deficit of interest. And so the puzzle or the trick is, well, how do you get somebody interested in talking about something that they're disinterested in?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of ways to go about this, but essentially what I did or advocate for in the book is taking what Schaeffer did in the rationality side of his kind of presuppositional approach, and then pushed it down to the heart or the affect, the emotion, the desire. So where Schaeffer would advocate in Labrie and the middle of the 20th century.
Talk about Francis Schaeffer, yeah.
Francis Schaeffer, yeah, I'm sorry. What he advocated for and was very successful is kind of rationally poking holes into contradictions of people's worldviews to get them to recognize that, oh, the things that I assumed were true are not really true. And then that introduces a bit of doubt, wondering like, well, why aren't those things true? And then you can present Christianity as a rational and a reasonable alternative to the beliefs that they now realize don't hold as much water as they once thought. Well, the problem with apatheists is, again, they don't care. They're not really interested in thinking along those lines. And so, but that's not the case that they don't care about anything at all. And so what I advocate for is not so much pushing against what Schaeffer called pressure points, these points of contradiction in the mind, but pressure points in the heart. So we all assume, well, first I should say we all desire happiness and joy, fullness and meaning and those types of things. And unless you're receiving your ultimate joy and happiness from the Creator, you're inevitably getting it from the creation. And because we live in a fallen creation, we know that it's essentially idolatry, right? And so the idea is to get people to doubt the things that bring them meaning or happiness and joy, not in a mean way, but in a way that honestly causes them to reflect and to think about, well, man, I find all of my identity and meaning and joy in running marathons and in my girlfriend. But what happens if, God forbid, you develop some kind of disease and you can no longer run and your significant other leaves you? What's bringing you happiness and joy then? Well, I guess it would be to transfer to other kind of hobby or another kind of relationship. And again, the hobby can go away, the relationship could end, it could turn sour, it can turn dark and abusive. When we draw happiness from the created order, we're looking at it through a very rose-colored glasses, and we never consider the flip side to when a happy relationship can turn bad. So the question we ought to ask is, well, why do you think that thing or that person or that activity is always going to bring you joy? And why do you think it's powerful enough to sustain your identity through even the darkest moments of your life? Those are uncomfortable questions, but essentially what you're doing is you're getting people to recognize for the very first time that what they assumed was bringing them happiness and fullness and joy might not always last. And even though that's an uncomfortable, thought to have, it's a really healthy one because it lifts our chins upward to the transcendent. And that gets people interested in talking about, well, what is beyond what I thought was the frontier of joy bringers in this world?
Yeah. Do you think, one of the popular level apologists out there is Frank Turk. He wrote I Don't Have Faith to Be an Atheist. We've had him to the campus, and very good communicator. He always gets a good turnout and everything. But the one thing he always seems to bring out in students at the Q&A when they're kind of asking their questions, he'll say, do you think you're on a happiness quest or a truth quest in life? Like, I mean, do you think that you're just simply, you don't care about truth, you don't care whether God exists, you're apathetic towards it, and you just want to pursue your happiness, whatever makes you happy, or do you really care? And that really, pokes some holes in their thinking, like getting to think through what they're really doing. I've used that line with students a lot too. Do you think do you care? Because I had one guy, I think was it last week or maybe 10 days ago, he said, well, I'm happy where I am at this stage of my life, and blah, 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 blah. So I probably, what I would need to say to him, like you have here, is to find out what is it that's making you happy, right? What is it that's really giving you your identity and joy that allows you to say that the God question isn't that relevant to you? I mean, so those are the things we should be asking them when they say, right? They say, well, I'm just not interested, and it's just irrelevant to me or something, right? We need to probe a little deeper, right? And find out what their identity, what they think they're kind of drawing their identity from, right? Because identity is a huge question these days.
Huge.
And so,
Yeah.
would you say that's kind of the best approach, something like that? Just
Yeah.
kind of probe
And
a little deeper, you mean? Yeah.
yes. Yeah. And really, there's a lot of ways that you can go about doing it. Everybody cares to one degree or another about the aesthetics of life. So what is beautiful? What is meaningful? What is love? What is joy? And a lot of these feel like really squishy, fluffy types of questions, but they're really baked into what it means to be a human being. And years ago, Augustine pointed out the fact that the happy life, or a life of fullness, or a life of joy, is something that every single human being, without exception, desires. And so for me, that's the on-ramp, right? It might not be that somebody cares all that much about beauty, but they do care about being happy. And they might not care all that much about, I don't know, social causes or those types of things, but they don't want to be sad. They don't want to live in sorrow. So they are in pursuit somehow, some way, in some kind of form of happiness. And if that happiness is not centered in the triune God of Scripture, then ultimately it's falling short of being powerful and permanent enough to sustain us through the worst of life.
Yeah, I thought of you when I was reading this chapter. I have these two books right here. I know you probably know them, but I felt like you were kind of going down a little bit of the same path as some of these authors here, like the Gansel book, Our Deepest Desires. He says, even if Christianity is true, if someone doesn't see it as good or doesn't meet their desires like happiness or existential needs, then it's going to kind of fall on deaf ears. And then Williams, in his book on existential reasons to belief in God, he thinks God's already built those existential desires in us. We just need to kind of bring them to the surface, and show people, hey, those are there because God put those there. You know what I mean? And so I find that people, whenever we're dealing with students, you always try to meet them where they're at. And some people are going to be definitely more on the existential bent. They're looking, I think everybody does want to be, you're right. I think happiness is like a core value of our country. It's like we're kind of obsessed with happiness in the US. Nobody wants to be depressed. Nobody wants to be, my parents always said to me growing up, are you happy? Are you happy? Like every 2 years or every 2 months. But anyway, that was the 70s or 80s. But yeah, so I think it's kind of similar to what these guys are kind of saying in these books. So the question is how we can kind of unearth those things and get them to find out what they're finding. We ask them, actually, students, we do ask them, what do you think you're getting your main identity from right now? Like, what is it? What are you pulling from? Because we do want to get them to see that. And so I think that's excellent. So you say here also, you say, so for apatheists, there's incredible irony behind the answers I hear. They don't care about God, but they do care about joy. Yet apathyism thwarts one's pursuit of what humans desire most, lives of joy. We want to be happy, to experience joy that inspires and lingers. Whether we find that joy in love or peace in lifestyles or people, we spend all our time and money searching for joy. The problem, though, is that joy is not something we can find, but rather something that finds us. Ironically, if we're indifferent to God, then we are indifferent to the true part of joy, the very thing we desire most. So I was just, I have a typo there, sorry, in the bottom here, but I think that, so I was talking about when I talk with students or people, are you in a happiness quest or a truth quest? I know you already know this, but I assume that we're trying to point them to, Mormons are some of the actually the happiest people I've ever met, but I don't think what they believe is true. I just don't think there's any good evidence for the Book of Mormon. That's obvious. But so do you weave in, are you still talking about when you're probing to what gives them the happiness thing to show them that that's not based in truth? It's not based in anything, it's lasting truth, right? It's not based in something that's really the true fulfillment that they're looking for. So truth can't really be divorced out of the question, because I know a lot of apologists, they're hyper focused on truth and rational truth and things like that, but it's almost like when you do evangelism apologetics, you just can't get rid of that truth question at some level, because God's truth, Jesus is truth, so you're talking about weaving that in there in some way, right? From what you're saying.
Yeah, and neither should you abandon the question of what is truth. This is what Pilate asked to truth, John 14:6 or 16:4. But one of the questions that Jesus liked to ask throughout his Gospels is not what do you think, but what do you want? And I think that's really important, because wanting gets at both your pursuit of truth and your pursuit of fullness. What you feel like there's some kind of hole in you, both in what you know and what you feel in your heart, and you want to fill those things. And inevitably, we fill those things in the created order, right? That's the essentially idolatry. So my point here is not to abandon the pursuit of truth at all, and I certainly don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Classical apologetic methods work. A lot of people are looking for some kind of rational reason for the hope that lies within it. So I'm not talking about swinging the pendulum all the other way.
Yeah, I know. I'm just bringing it up.
Yeah. But what I am advocating for is people, we all, even us as believers, so I'm not talking about just apatheists, but every single human being needs to recognize that ultimately our happiness and our joy is sourced in God, and anything that brings us joy and happiness that's not God is downstream from him. Now, those things that are downstream from him can pollute that joy and happiness that he brings us. It can distort those happiness and joy that God wants to bring us, or it can enhance and remind us that there is a greater joy that is beyond here, right? I mean, what if we have a 2-year-old? I can't describe to you how happy I am when I hear her giggling and playing with the dog. And yet at the same time, I know one day she's going to come home and she's going to tell me she hates me and she doesn't want to see me, right? If my ultimate joy bringer, hopefully not, but this is just life, right? If my ultimate joy bringer was my daughter, well, it might work today, but it's not going to work tomorrow. So who is my daughter but a gift from a good and perfect gift giver in heaven? James says all good and perfect gifts come from above. And so really the whole point is to get people to recognize, like, your happiness, your joy bringers in this world are downstream from a greater source of joy. And they are either inhibiting or enhancing this joy that you were designed and created for. Now, there's a big caveat with this too. I don't want to fall off on the other side of the horse and then swing so far into a utilitarianism of the gospel, like believe in Jesus so you can be happy.
Right.
God will give you your best life now. It's not what I'm advocating for either. The whole point of belief in God is so that his redemptive work reigns in your life and he receives glory for eternity. With that comes the blessing of happiness that we cannot conceive in this world. And so I want to be careful not to put a carrot in front of a horse, but at the same time, we're fooling ourselves if we don't believe that a true understanding of the gospel does not come with joy. Of course it does. And joy was set before the Lord Jesus, and that's why he endured the cross, Hebrews tells us. The whole letter of Philippians is essentially about the paradox of Paul's joy of, being beaten and jailed and rejected, and yet still he had joy because his identity was in God.
Yeah, so it's kind of like when I have this chart here on the 3 views of truth. We're trying to get people to see that, our belief in God, our belief in Jesus based in reality. And of course, someone could say, well, how do you know that? What's your evidence for that? Of course, we can talk about that. But the one thing that the big thing today is popular. One of the big things is popular in some areas. I do see this. I've seen this on campus for years, and this is the pragmatic view of truth. It's just, is this going to really help me? What difference does this make in my life? Is it going to make a beneficial? Is it going to be beneficial to me? Is it going to work in my marriage? Is it going to work in my job? Whatever. And I had a friend who's a well-known Christian apologist say to me, they had called him into Bible study, and these are a bunch of mothers and wives. And I'm not trying to stereotype here, but he said they really weren't that interested in, rational argumentation, how to defend their faith. They just were interested in how Christianity can help them be a better wife or a better better mother. You know what I mean? And so that's just the way, that's kind of built into the fabric of our culture. It's very pragmatic, if something makes a difference. And so I run into this on campus a lot, and sometimes I have to tell them, well, I understand pragmatic difference is important, but you also want to believe in something that's based in reality. I mean, like an atheist told me once, hey, Eric, if you tell your son that there's 6 Martians under your bed at night and makes him sleep at night, who cares whether that's based in reality? It helps them, right? So I just try to tie in the truth issue with the pragmatism. I'm trying to get them to see we still need to think about what we're believing is actually true, because I don't want to like believe a lie and have it help me. You know what I mean? And so it's very tricky these days, though. It's tricky because pragmatism is so prevalent. You know what I mean? And so would you say that's definitely true with the pragmatism thing?
I would say pragmatism is prevalent, and then utilitarianism is also is growing. You know, whatever is true is whatever brings the most happiness to the most amount of people.
Right.
Now, I define what happiness is.
Right.
So you can see where we're going off the rails there already. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's right, and that's a challenge. It's a challenge. We live in the same culture as our neighbors do, and so we're constantly, we swim in the same water of pragmatism and utilitarianism as well, and so we have to be on alert for that as well.
Yeah, and so it's kind of like you know, I always tell people, you know, I try to explain with the truth issue, you know, it's like you know, whether you walk away from a conversation, I put a little pebble in your shoe to think about something, you know, not to get you to fully embrace it, but you know, God's still going to be there even if you stay busy, you know, whether you're happy or not, whether you believe he doesn't exist or doesn't exist, or you know, God's a reality outside of ourselves. And so, you know, it seems like I'm trying to bring them back to the objective truth thing. They do care about truth in their lives every day. They, you know, they care about true bank statements. They care about, you know, getting the right information from their teachers. They want people to tell them the truth. So we can't survive without truth. But I just find that's what I find ironic is that you have all this need for truth all day in your life to exist. And then when it comes to the God question, it's like, well, it's just not that important, you know, or I just don't know, you know, I'm just going to stay busy and it doesn't really matter. You know, it's just interesting, you know, it's just the contrast, you know, it comes to the God question. So anyway, well, okay. Well, we covered some of that, the issues. So let's go back to the chat room here. We've already got some, well, look what Carla put a little quote from Pascal here. That's true. People invariably arrive at their beliefs, not the basis of proof what they believe they find attractive. And that's true. And what's the guy that has a book out? You probably know the guy. Is it James Smith? He has a book out. He wrote on not habits.
You are what you love.
Yeah. What is it?
You are what you love.
Yeah, you are
James
what you love. And so you're right. You are what you love. People pursue what they love. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
the three philosophers I think are going to help us the most moving forward into this kind of brave new world of apathy and indifference are going to be Augustine, Pascal, and Kierkegaard.
And Kierkegaard.
And Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
And Jamie Smith right now is probably the best kind of interpreter of Augustine in kind of a broadly evangelical, I guess. I don't even know if he would accept that term, but that kind of a world. So yeah, his cultural liturgies set is really good, especially the first volume, and then You Are What You Love is really approachable. That I'd recommend. And then he's got another one that was really good, On the Road with Saint Augustine. Which was a lot of that was a good read. That was a lot of fun too.
Yeah. So Gary had a question in the chat room here. He says, does this indifference to God mean that we're getting closer to godless society of the end times mentioned in the Bible? I have no idea, but indifference to God. Well, you say in your book, you talk about how long was it ago everybody believed in God? Like, was it what period we were?
That was Calvin. So Calvin says in forget what the book was called, but basically he said nobody's going to want to be seen as being completely indifferent to the subject of religion. Just that was a presupposition, and he wrote it. And 500 years later, that's not true. That's not true at all. Calvin's living in a completely different culture than we are today. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of gauge for how far we've come away from that kind of a culture.
It is true though that I would say when we pop our question, does God exist? Yes, no, or I don't know. Overall, we still get way more yeses than no's, or I don't know. Even on a campus. I mean, yes, I get some no's and I don't knows, but if you look at the end of the day, if you count them up, I mean, people walk by, yes, and then we generally ask them, well, can you give me just one reason why you would say yes? And generally they say the two biggest reasons are religious experience. They see God working in their lives, and secondly, creation. They're just like, there's no way this all just came together just through some cosmic accident.
Yeah.
That's probably the
So
number two
Romans
reasons
1.
they say. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. So, so you would say that so to answer Gary's question, I guess, would you gauge it that there's no way to know if we're in the, approaching the end times?
I'm not a futurist. I don't
Not an
like to try to
eschatological prophet. Come on. So,
I'm not. I don't like to predict the future. I like to stick very closely to kind of what's been revealed, and what's been revealed, frankly, is not a lot. But I will say that just because our culture is experiencing a growth of apatheism, if it is, it doesn't mean that every culture everywhere is experiencing that. I went to Haiti a few years ago, and to be apathetic to God is as bizarre as believing in unicorns. I mean, they couldn't fathom how you could not care about him. So I don't know if there'd ever be a time when that kind of apathy would overtake everywhere. But yeah, I'll just shrug my shoulders on that question.
Depends on where you are, what part of the country.
Yeah, it depends where you are.
Europe is going to be different. So in Haiti, do they believe in different, like voodoo and all that stuff? But I mean, is there like Catholicism and stuff there? And I mean,
so the three biggies, the three biggies were Protestantism, Catholicism, and hoodoo, which is their version of African traditional religions.
Right. Okay. All right. And Earl's asking, have apatheists carefully considered God and eternity? Well, you're kind of saying no because they don't care, right?
It depends on when you're asking. So maybe they did at one point in life, but because they've come to kind of an apatheistic position, their careful consideration did not take them to the place where it should have. So maybe earlier in life that they were many reasons,
Cutting out a little bit. See if we can get you back here.
How are we doing? Am I still there?
Yeah, that's better. Well, okay, there you go. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So I would just say it depends on when you ask a person.
Right. Would you say that with the apatheist thing that people I'd have to say really the biggest issue is just the busyness and distraction. I just think with the technology, it's just who has time? It's just like when I can go on here all day long and sit on my phone and sit on social media. So I don't know, what was it? And Pascal also said the two biggest distractions that people have is, he says, whenever they slow down for a second to think about God, just for a split, so then they get busier. Then they just get busier and busier and busier. So the biggest thing is just distraction and busyness is what he said. So he's you're kind of repeating what he said a little bit, so diversion. He said diversion.
Yeah,
so,
diversion. Yep.
Yeah. And so we're going to have our work cut out for us. Yeah. So anyway, and I think you're right. It's a much slower conversation. It's not always right away. It can be a process over time, and we need to be patient. It is a different day. And so sometimes it's just putting a little pebble in their shoe to think about and something to get them going. We had a guy that sometimes we're on campus, even though people don't talk to us all the time, but they see us, sometimes they'll come back like 3 or 4 days like, oh yeah, I've seen you out here. I've seen you out here. I've seen that. I've been meaning to talk to you about this. So sometimes just being visible, give you an option, just to come back and talk to you. And we're not shouting at anybody at all. We're not preaching to anybody. It's just some little basic conversational setup, so anyway. Okay, anybody else? Any other questions or anything? Chat room questions, or you want to talk verbally? Anybody want to ask a question?
I can ask a question.
You can do that. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate your time. I was talking to a student one time, and he had a 5-year plan, and he knew what kind of girl he was going to marry and where he would be with jobs and everything. And then I tried to present scenarios, going back to, well, if you find your identity in that, what if something doesn't work out? And finally had him like, what if you're in an accident, you're lying paralyzed on your bed? And so he just said, well, he would have his cousin come over and smother him to death or something like that. And he on it's kind of like if he didn't get what he wanted, then he was just done. And it wasn't like he was gonna find it in a different source. And I just, I don't know if I know what to say to that. If people, I'm just done. If I can't have my happiness in these things, then why bother living?
Yeah, so I think that the cul-de-sac nihilism is at the end of the road there. And that kind of a theory or theorizing about what I would do, for most people, he's never going to put that into practice. I mean, I don't know what to say. There's no ghost of Christmas future that can take him to his, when he's calling his friend to smother him with a pillow to death because he didn't marry the right girl or have enough money. But instinctually, nobody actually wants that to happen. If you do, that's an indication of a right? We're talking about suicidal ideation, even if he's making light of it. So at that point, I don't know what to say. I mean, what some people need to walk through life long enough to realize that all of their, the plans that they made are not coming true. And that all of that kind of cavalier attitude of, well, I'll just have my friend end it for me. When you get to that point, you don't actually want that to happen. And so hopefully there will be believers, or that he will have enough encounter with the gospel at that point to finally have his chin tipped upward. I don't think there's a panacea to help that kind of an attitude, but I have a strong suspicion that when push comes to shove, and if he had to enact that, not going to happen. And hopefully, if that ever occurred, or he got to that point in his life, there would be someone there who could shepherd him through it.
Did you remember seeing a movie? I can't remember if it was called You Before Me or Me Before You, or it was a situation. The movie I'm thinking about was a young man that was paralyzed and making the decision that he didn't want to endure life. And I know there was another guy over in Britain that was in the locked in syndrome, and he's just like, I'm just going to end it, and I don't know if just the Christians don't get to these people. I mean, the one was obviously a movie, but why, why some people just...
So end of life counseling is very complicated, and it's very specialized. So if we're talking about like your everyday evangelistic encounter, you're probably not going to be there. But I mean, I don't know what to say except there's never a reason to romanticize or to glorify ending one's life simply because they don't feel happiness or joy in the created order. There's always a chance for them to recognize that even though they've been walking in an extremely low valley, or they've been suffering, or they've been in poverty, that God himself incarnated and experienced all those things too. And yet it was still for joy that was set before him, that he went to great lengths to redeem you. And that's something of an incredible attraction to the gospel, the incarnational experience of the Lord Jesus. Like, God doesn't just assent to what you're going through. He's been there. He knows what that kind of pain and torment and sorrow feels like. He knows what it means to be rejected. He knows what it means to go hungry. He knows what it means to be homeless, right? So there's still, I mean, the gospel is still hopeful in those moments. But like I said, I'm just speaking also from kind of a pastoral perspective. End of life counseling is complex. It is very complex.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Carl, you want to follow up with anything else? You done, or? Okay. Ian says here, let's see, just a couple more. It says, he's right. I assume you believe this. Want to take a crisis. Generally, you can take a crisis, personal crisis or social crisis, to shake people out of apathy. In 9/11, I'll never forget. You probably, well, I mean, I'm older than you, but I remember I was that day. It seems like people got kind of interested in going back to church for like a month, and then it just kind of went back to normal. It seems like as soon as we got back to our security and stability thing, but man, it was like that 1 month or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, it was, people were thinking about God again, but now, then they just went right back to the normal again. So it's just interesting, that's what it takes. With some people.
I say for Ian, that you're right. For some people, that's what it takes. It takes either rock bottom or something so shocking to the system that you kind of are pulled up out of the water for a second to see the horizon that you didn't think was there before. So I absolutely agree. I wouldn't advocate pushing people into that position, but to be there to be patient and show grace and mercy, but stand with truth when they're in those positions. Those are
And
really, really precious times to steward in people's lives. Yeah.
yeah, so when Carla talked about the identity thing with that guy she was talking to, we also, like recently, a student of ours, former student, got to witness or minister to a transgender student, and that transgender student told her that this is everything to me. If this doesn't go through and I transition, that my life is over and my whole identity is in this thing, this gender issue. So now we've got a crisis of identity and gender, sexuality. Of course, we've had that for a while. So it just seems that people are looking for these identities in the created order things over and over, and they're just putting so much stock in it. Could be ethnicity, it could be that issue is a big deal, or it could be anything else. So I don't know how we're going to get through that. We're just going to have to keep pushing people back to their core identity should hopefully be as an image bearer of God, and that should be their core identity. But don't you think we've got our work cut out for us in there, getting people back there?
Yeah, but I'm optimistic. I mean, I think it's a great stewardship opportunity for the church. I mean, there's very few novel challenges to evangelism. I mean, the church has been here for 2,000 years. It's seen just about everything. And apathyism proper, I think, is something that's, was an embryo in the Enlightenment, but has now finally given birth in our culture. And it's legitimately new. I mean, I don't imagine the apostles having to try to get people to be interested in questions related to the supernatural. Everybody just assumed it.
Right.
This is a kind of I mean, think of ourselves as pioneers in this kind of new frontier of evangelism. So yes, it is a challenge, but it's also, in a sense, exciting because we get to kind of pioneer new methods of reaching the lost.
Right. We made a lot of adjustments on our campus. Like things I've made so many mistakes, of course. You learn some things. Yep. Okay, that's just not gonna cut it. We need to go to the identity question a lot or something else. So I agree. Okay. Well, great. And you're right here. David says here we live in a pleasure-driven culture. Yes, we do. Absolutely. Speak to us on the problem of pleasure. So absolutely, 100%. So Kyle, is this book something you're going to be, are you getting a lot of response from it? Is something you're seeing people are a lot of interest in? It's just too early to tell.
I mean, it's been out for a month and a half, so maybe it's too early to tell. No, yeah. I've seen a lot of traction though. For a lot of people, it's been, oh, that's what I've been experiencing.
Right.
And frankly, if that's all it ever does, then I'm so happy, because what I want us to recognize is that thing you can't quite put your finger on. This is it. This is what causes it. Now we need to get our arms around. I wanted it to be kind of a conversation starter. In fact, I'm done with this kind of apathyism thing. I'm moving on to Mormonism. I'm being offered a contract to write on Mormonism from a publisher. So I'm shifting gears towards my kind of the specialty. So I do hope somebody will take the baton, like they'll pick this up and roll with it. But yeah, if that's the kind of traction it's getting, then I'm very happy about it.
So when you say Mormonism, are you interested in reaching Mormons? How to, like, methodology in reaching them? Is that what you're approaching, or is it a different thing? There's
a gap that I perceived between the evangelical or the kind of traditional, well, I call it Nicene Christians, right? Trinitarian Christians. Between us and Latter-day Saint academics. And there's not good dialogue, not good conversation that takes place between those two. And so kind of in my academic life, I've tried to become bilingual between historic Nicene Christianity and Mormonism. And so that I can engage in dialogue with Latter-day Saints who are part of the institutions, the big institutions that are doing a lot of work, a lot of thinking through their doctrine and their praxis. They don't have a lot of dialogue partners at that level. So this book will be kind of one of those things. I actively participate in dialogues in Salt Lake. I've been doing that for 8 years. So yeah, I don't know what you'd call that. I just feel like that's where I'm being led to kind of be a Nicene Trinitarian, biblically based Christian, as somebody who can dialogue with Latter-day Saints who care very deeply about their doctrine, have thought very deeply about their doctrine, and need a sounding board or a dialogue partner on those truth claims.
Fascinating, because most of the Mormons, we do with on campus and missionaries, they seem to not be able to carry on those highly academic, like the big, deep theological question. They know a little bit, but they're not able
they're
to.
like,
So
they're like 19-year-old kids.
right.
They're trained for 6 weeks and they're out for 2 years. So yeah.
Right. Right. Their best line they come up to us is, "Hey, how was class today?" We know what's coming, their pitch, right? If you're the Book of Mormon, but they're very nice, very kind. But
yeah,
we've had, the campuses, they're all over the campus. So interesting. That's an interesting pursuit. Well, if anyone else doesn't have any questions, I'm going to let Kyle go, and I'll stay on for a little bit longer. But does anybody have one last thing or something for Kyle? I know he's probably got his daughter pulling on his pant leg there, or something, but I know how that goes. Anybody else have anything to say or ask or anything? Quiet. I'm going to pull the Daryl Bach line in a second. Anybody?
Well, thanks for attending, Kyle. We really appreciate your presentation.
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for inviting me. It was a joy.
Yeah, Earl. That was Earl. He's in Nevada. So anyway, all right. Well, Kyle, we do appreciate it. I recorded this, and so I'll just send you the clip if you want it, if you don't mind. And
yeah, that'd be fun.
And I'll definitely be reviewing your book on Amazon soon. I try to review all the books I read. I just have nothing but time to write book reviews. So but I do write reviews though for publishers. So I'll look forward to. No, it is a good book. I recommend everybody get it. There's a lot of good nuggets in there, some good things to pull from. So I think it will help you. So Kyle, we appreciate you writing it and getting it out there. And I advertised it on the social media pages I have, and this clip will go on my YouTube channel. Hopefully it'll give you some more exposure. So, it won't be like, I'm not Sean McDowell or like Frank Turek or William Lane Craig, I've got like millions and millions of you watching, but you know what I mean? So we appreciate it. Yeah. And thank you so much. And we will definitely be looking for the book and how it does, but God bless you and enjoy fatherhood, my friend.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to stay on, everyone. See you, Kyle. You can punch out if you want.
Yep.
Okay,
Take
God
care.
bless
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay. All right, everyone. I'm still on. So what's going on? Anyone want to talk about anything else? No, you don't. Okay, goodbye. No. Anybody have any other questions or anything? There's Earl. He's back. Hey,
Yeah.
Earl.
Hey, so I don't know if you've seen this one.
Yeah, that's by Christian Smith.
Yeah. And I got the book because my granddaughter was in that, she's in that age. She just graduated from Harvey Mudd. And I tried to understand some of the thinking of her generation. And I wonder, so that was written in 2005. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if things have changed a great deal since 2005. Apathyism, some of what you described is in the book, from Kyle's book. I see elements of that in the soul searching, but then there's more than that. At least the as described in the book Soul Searching, young people are more interested in fitting in finding a balance, in general acceptance without criticism, low judgment. Mm-hmm. Don't judge anybody.
That's right.
Don't have conflicts.
Right.
So the idea of debating about God is something they don't want to do. I mean, they'll fight to the death about some social justice issue, but when it comes to discussions about faith and beliefs and even talking about life only is what we see here or life extends into eternity, they don't want to touch that. So I see elements of both there. Do you have any comment about that?
Yes, I do. I think Carla could attest to this too. She may have gone away to have some coffee, but don't drink coffee this late
at night.
I just said it. See, I knew what she was. As soon as I said that, I knew she was saying it because I believe this. Don't drink coffee this late at night. But I would say, we have noticed. I've noticed something very interesting on the campus throughout the last 3 or 4 years, maybe just in general. I don't remember. People are very tolerant. They don't treat you. Overall, we get respect most of the time. Yeah, we get a few people here and there that can be a little nasty, but it's very rare. And most people are very, very tolerant. Like, oh, thank you for the time. I appreciate you willing to talk to me. Or, you know, I respect what you're out here doing. I just don't agree with it, but I'm going to go my separate way. They're never coming up to us and knocking down our table or punching me or, you know, trying to beat us up or creating a big riot or anything. So I think there's a level within the, there's a tolerance out there that's developed. Now, you do know people are tolerant. They cry about being tolerant about everything, right? But overall, it seems to kind of seep down a little bit in some cases in religious discussions, at least where we're at. Now, I don't know what it's like in other campuses. It could get worse. I mean, I'm sure if you go to California, so there's campuses there, it could be like Berkeley. I call it Berkeley or something like that. So I have noticed that. And also, yeah, and I think Kyle was very right. What you're saying, Earl, is very right. They don't like judgmentalism. They don't like conflict generally, but you know what? They will they will fight to the death. Excuse me, for social justice issues. As you see, they will fight to the death for those things. So it's a very interesting time we live in. But what Kyle said tonight that struck a nerve with me was the issue of them wanting experiences. They find identity in their experiences, you know, like getting more experiences. And I think that's very true. So Carla, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm sorry, was the question mostly about like the persecution on campus, or?
Earl was asking, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Earl was just asking about how it just seemed, he's reading this book, this book on young people, you know, what they believe in our country. And it says that they don't like conflict. They like low-level judgmentalism, of course. They just want to get along. And I think that's true. I think I do see that with the tolerance. You know, don't you think we see a lot of tolerance on campus? Like people tolerate us, even if they don't agree with us. They're very tolerant. You know, of course, we're not yelling at them or screaming at them, Earl. You know, we don't have a sign shouting at them going, you know, repent or burn or something like that. You know, we're pretty cordial. And so I don't know. I think they're pretty tolerant overall. When you say
I think my comment was more that that book was written in 2005. When I read it a couple of years ago, it gave me a bit of an understanding, but some of what Kyle Beshears said, presented today, well, through your interpretation of it, gave me another a dimension of what is going on in people's heads and hearts that I didn't see in the soul searching book. And that is that they said you know, from his understanding, they don't care. That's a little bit different. The soul searching authors definitely said that they care, but they only care to the point of believing that there's something out there, but they're not willing to embrace something that is generally part of, let's say, organized religion of any kind. But they're more circumspect about the God or eternity and so on. And it's sort of like it's almost the gateway drug to apathyism.
Wait, that book was the book I remember. That's when they talked about moral therapeutic deism. Was that the book that mentioned that? The people,
yes, correct.
They surveyed like 3,000 teens or young people, and they said, yeah, I believe it's some sort of God, but he's not involved in my life. He has no bearing in my everyday life. And the whole goal of religion is just to be good. And that's kind of about it. Is that right? That was that book that talked about
that. And yet they are keen to be engaged in social justice matters, which I thought was great, because we certainly need that. But the level of sort of arm's length, it is as if I don't want to really wrestle with that question, is kind of what I took away from their observation of the teens. They want to leave it very open. They don't want to make any commitments about that.
That's true. That's been going on a long time, though. Yeah, because they know if they commit, if it's true, then it's going to call for a commitment. So obviously they'll want to commit to that. I mean, it's easier to stay busy and believe in some sort of moral therapeutic God, you know, who's not involved in your life. Just like New Age belief is still big, right? You believe in some sort of impersonal God, but he's not involved in your life. I had a guy 2 weeks ago. He believed in a God. It's just a higher power. The higher power line is always popular, right? Because that God's not really personal. He doesn't put any demands on you.
Yeah.
So that's been going on a while. Yeah. I don't, Carl, anything to add? I don't know.
Well, don't you think that part of it is just being in an affluent society? Like what he was saying, you know, people in Haiti, people in third world countries, they're living in that excluded middle where they're dealing with spiritual stuff. But I think what happened with my generation, the reason we dropped the ball is because we didn't, well, except for like the Gulf War, we didn't really know like a lot of unrest, and we grew up like even people in poverty in America have iPhones, and you know, I'm not trying to say across the board or generalize, but I just think it's a product of our culture where, like he was saying, they're just not sensing that. They're just not sensing that need. I think some students are so they want to live the American dream. They have a shot at it.